tell me a little bit more about your background?
Sure. So in terms of entrepreneurship, I don't have a traditional entrepreneurial background. I was an English major and comparative literature major, a Spanish minor, and a studio art minor in college. So no business degrees, no nothing like that.
How did you approach technology world?
So it's really interesting. Ever since I was a child, I've always been fascinated by software and hardware and things like that. It was funny when the IBM PC first came out. My father, who's a professor at Stanford, got one from the university, and he had to go through a 2-week course on how to use it. And he left the manuals at home, and I learned basically what he learned in 2 weeks, I learned in a couple of days.
Great.
And so I think from then on, there was something natural that I understood about technology. And since then, I've always been sort of the go-to person that, friends, family, coworkers, he's the guy to support you.
Great. Michael, I would like to know a little bit more about your college experience, and that it's not tech-based or business-based, and how did you move from that degree to business and technology?
Sure. So I have a funny story in college. We all know the worst case scenario will always happen when you have a deadline, and that's true with startups, with business in general. And I had my old PC sort of break hours before my paper was due. And back then they didn't have hard drives, they only had floppy drives, and I learned how to swap the cables, open up the computer, swap the cables, and then just run on one floppy drive. And
you hacked your computer.
I hacked my computer, that's right, and got the paper done on time, and it was a big success. But since then, I've always been the guy to take apart things to try and fix them. Whether it was a dryer when I was a kid, I took it apart because it wasn't working, and I fixed that. But then moving forward, as I started down my career, I found that people really gravitated towards how-to content. Content where they wanted to be the ones to fix something or to understand how something works, whether it's hardware or software or something like that. And so that's kind of where I started in my entrepreneurship.
This is great. Nowadays you work with HighTechDad, right?
Yes. So that was a company that I started, I guess you could call it a company, probably about 10 or 12 years ago. And it was really started on a personal desire to review technology. And I had a friend who worked at a PR firm, and he wanted his clients' products reviewed. So he would send me products and I would review them, whether they started with like iPhone cases or things like that. And since then, the site itself has grown. Because I found that there were a lot of sites talking about technology and a lot of sites talking about family, but there wasn't anyone talking about the intersection between the two and how technology is relevant and useful within the family environment. And so that was the niche that I gravitated towards and started writing content about on HighTechDad. It's kind of an addiction for me, and I think that's probably pretty common with many entrepreneurs, is that you suddenly find something that you're passionate about and it can consume you. And in fact, my wife sort of calls technology as the other woman. So she's competing for time, the family's competing for time, and technology is competing for time. But as it evolved, I realized I found myself addicted to creating content that people would find relevant and helpful. And it's expanded beyond just fix-its and things like that to understanding how social media works within the family environment. I have 3 daughters. They're all sort of hitting that stage of getting online and using their iPhones and that sort of thing. And I wanted to make sure that I was at least now ahead of the curve than than they were, but they're catching up pretty quickly.
How do you manage family, business? It's a lot to coordinate. How is your time nowadays?
It doesn't really exist. It's because I'm I'm typically working a full-time job, so I do a lot of evangelism of the cloud computing space and other types of high-tech products. So I had a full-time job. I had the HighTechDad, which I kind of tried to get in whenever I was commuting, or at nighttime or early in the morning, whenever I had a chance, because really my primary drivers are my family, number one, and a full-time job, number two, because you have to put food on the table.
Yeah.
And that's a struggle that I think a lot of entrepreneurs have trouble with. They have a lot of things going on, and they may not be monetizing a lot of these things. So how do you make ends meet? How do you balance the time? And you really just live on a lot of coffee and not much sleep, and just try to get as much as you can done.
Do you have principles, life principles that you follow that inspire you?
So in terms of my writing, I like, while it's an addiction for me, I really want to provide value and start a conversation and engagement, and really hopefully have people identify with what I'm saying. Because there's nothing worse than just writing to write, and not have any kind of direction. But if you write with a purpose, and you do your business with a purpose, then people can understand that passion.
And who inspires you in general to get into this tech business world?
The tech business world was kind of self-inspired, but in terms of writing, my father is a published professor and taught me everything I knew about how to write coherently and analyze things. And also, having a liberal arts background is very different than most people who have a MBA or something like that. And I have to say that having a liberal arts background allows you to read, write, analyze, and articulate better than many people. I've found that many people in business, they may have grand ideas, they may know how to put together business models and things like that, but if they can't communicate their thoughts
they can't
well,
express,
exactly, then they're not going to go very far. So my main advice is don't be afraid, to take a chance. You never know what's going to happen. I know that many entrepreneurs fail in what they do, and before I started doing HighTechDad, I had decided that I wanted to write a how-to book, and this was 15 years ago. And I didn't have the time. I had a new family. Publishing isn't what it is now. It's a lot easier to self-publish or do e-publishing. And so while I had that passion, I needed to find an outlet. And blogging for me was that perfect use of technology. It was online, it was relatively inexpensive, and it was a great way to really get started and make a name for yourself.